when paramedic Elise Morgan broke protocol to help a homeless veteran on the coldest night of the year, she risked everything. "Break the rules again and you're finished," her supervisor warned. But her act of compassion was about to unravel decades of government secrets. Within days, military officials arrived at her firehouse, a mysterious call from the Pentagon, a decorated general making a personal appearance. Some heroes vanish from history by accident. Others are deliberately erased. What Elise discovered about the man she saved would not only change her life forever, but restore a legacy that powerful forces had tried to bury. Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage happen when one person chooses humanity over protocol. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed. Because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The merciless December wind howled through the empty streets of Riverdale, carrying with it the promise of the season's first snowfall. Paramedic Elise Morgan pulled her ambulance into the station garage, exhaustion etched across her face after a brutal 12-hour shift. 3 cardiac arrests, a multi-car pileup on the highway, and a child with severe asthma, the kind of day that hollowed you out and left you questioning humanity's fragility. As the garage door rumbled closed behind her, Elise caught a flicker of movement in the security monitor, something by the station's side entrance. A shadow hunched against the wall, seeking shelter from the bitter cold. "Not again," sighed Captain Reynolds, appearing beside her. "Third one this week. City policy's clear. Call the police. Let them handle it. We're not a shelter." His breath fogged in the unheated garage as he turned away. "I'm heading home. Lock up when you leave." Elise nodded, watching the captain's taillights disappear into the night. The station stood empty now. Shift change had left her alone to complete the ambulance inventory. Her gaze drifted back to the monitor, where the huddled figure remained motionless against the building's brick exterior. The temperature display on the wall read 17 degrees, dropping fast. Protocol was clear. The city had implemented strict no accommodation policies after complaints about homeless individuals congregating around emergency services buildings. The memo from administration had been unambiguous. Call law enforcement. Do not engage. No exceptions. Elise pulled her jacket tighter and walked to the side door, just to check, just to make sure they were okay. The frigid air stole her breath. As she stepped outside, curled against the wall was an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s, wrapped in a threadbare blanket crusted with ice. His weathered face peeked out from beneath a faded navy cap, his white beard crystallized from his own frozen breath. "Sir?" Elise knelt beside him. "Sir, you can't stay here." The man's eyes cracked open, striking blue against his reddened face. "Just resting a moment, ma'am," he whispered through cracked lips. "Be on my way shortly." In the dim security light, Elise noticed the service patches on his worn jacket. Korean War, Marine Corps. His fingers, mottled with early frostbite, clutched a small photograph. A younger version of himself in dress blues beside a smiling woman. Protocol echoed in her mind. "Call law enforcement. Do not engage." "What's your name, sir?" she asked instead. Thomas Winters." His voice was a raspy whisper. "Served my country. Now can't even find a warm place to sleep." Elise glanced back at the empty station, then to the security camera above them. Her career flashed before her eyes. 6 years of dedicated service, the promotion she was being considered for, her spotless record, all jeopardized by what she was about to do. "Come with me, Mr. Winters," she said, helping him to his feet. "Just for tonight." The old veteran's legs buckled beneath him. Elise caught him, feeling how little he weighed, how the cold had seeped into his very bones. Inside the station's break room, she settled him near the heater, wrapping him in fresh, Blankets from the ambulance supplies? This could cost you your job, Thomas whispered as she placed a steaming cup of coffee in his trembling hands. Elise smiled sadly. Some things matter more than rules, Mr. Winters. She knew the morning would bring consequences. The security footage would reveal her compassion-driven defiance. The administration's response would be swift and unforgiving. 6 years of service reduced to a single act of disobedience. But as Thomas's color slowly returned and his frozen hands began to thaw, Elise knew with absolute certainty, even as her professional future hung in the balance, that some rules were meant to be broken. Some moments demanded we choose humanity over policy. What she couldn't know, as she prepared a meal from her own lunch bag for the grateful veteran, was that this act of kindness would set in motion events that would transform not only her life, but the entire Riverdale community. By morning, her simple choice would ripple outward in ways she could never have imagined. The shrill alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m., though Elise Morgan was already awake. Sleep had become a luxury she rarely enjoyed fully, her mind perpetually alert for the next emergency. Her modest one-bedroom apartment sat 3 blocks from Riverdale Memorial Hospital, close enough to hear ambulance sirens in the night, a sound that had become her lullaby. She moved through her morning ritual with practiced efficiency, coffee brewed strong and black, uniform pressed crisp despite countless washings, boots polished to a shine that would make her father proud. On the small entry table, nestled between her keys and paramedic badge, sat a faded photograph in a simple silver frame. A broad-shouldered Marine in dress blues smiled back at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners just like hers. "Morning, Dad," Elise whispered, touching the frame gently. Another day, another battle. Staff Sergeant James Morgan had raised her alone after her mother left when Elise was just 4. His military precision and unwavering sense of duty shaped her childhood. Everything had a place, every promise was kept, and service always came before self. When cancer took him 5 years ago, Elise had stood stone-faced at his military funeral, accepting the folded flag with the same stoic strength he had instilled in her. The streets of Riverdale were still shrouded in darkness as Elise walked to work, her breath clouding before her. The homeless man huddled in the doorway of the closed bakery was new, or perhaps just new to this spot. Elise stopped, crouched down, and placed a granola bar and hand warmers beside him. Small offerings that wouldn't change his circumstances, but might ease his mourning. The city had installed anti-homeless benches at the bus stop across the street last month, divided by metal armrests that made lying down impossible. Progress, according to the city council. Cruelty, according to Elise. "Your 10 minutes. Early, Morgan," said Dispatch Officer Collins as she signed in. "As usual." "Dad always said if you're not early, you're late," she replied with a half-smile. The ambulance bay hummed with activity, crews changing shifts, equipment being checked, the constant radio chatter of emergencies unfolding across the city. This was her world, where chaos was routine and trauma an everyday occurrence. Elise moved through it with a calm competence that had earned her respect among peers and the nickname Ice Queen from those who mistook her composure for coldness. They didn't see her slip extra blankets to the elderly patient shivering in the ER waiting room. They missed how she memorized the names of regular homeless patients, or how she paid for one schizophrenic man's medication when his benefits were delayed. Small rebellions against a system too broken to care for its most vulnerable. 3. Overdoses before breakfast, her partner Rico sighed, sliding into the driver's seat beside her. Just another Tuesday in paradise. Elise checked their supplies with methodical precision. "My father used to say difficult days reveal who we really are." "Your Marine dad sounds like he was intense," Rico chuckled. "He was," Elise said quietly. 2 tours in Desert Storm, came home with shrapnel in his shoulder and nightmares he never discussed. Her fingers unconsciously traced the Marine Corps emblem she wore on a thin chain around her neck. He taught me that veterans don't stop serving when they take off the uniform. The world just stops seeing their sacrifice. The radio crackled with their first call: elderly fall victim, possible hip fracture. As Rico pulled the ambulance into morning traffic, Elise gazed at the encampment of homeless individuals beneath the highway overpass. 3 veterans there that she knew of, including one former army medic who now couldn't afford insulin. "One day, I'm going to do more than just bandage wounds," she said almost to herself. "Something sustainable, something that matters." Rico glanced at her. "You already do more than most, Elise." She shook her head, watching the city scroll past. Not enough. Not yet. What Elise couldn't articulate was how helping Thomas Winters had awakened something in her, a purpose that felt like her father's hand guiding her forward. The disciplinary meeting scheduled for tomorrow might end her career, but as the daughter of Staff Sergeant James Morgan had learned early, sometimes the right path was the hardest one to walk. The disciplinary hearing had been exactly as brutal as Elise expected. Unauthorized use of city property, violation of explicit policy, and compromising station security. Each charge delivered with bureaucratic precision by Chief Barton, his face impassive beneath fluorescent lights, her 6 years of exemplary service reduced to a 2-week suspension without pay and a permanent mark on her record. "Consider yourself lucky, Morgan," the chief had concluded, sliding the paperwork across the table. The board wanted termination. Now, 3 days into her suspension, Elise found herself driving through Riverdale's forgotten corners, scanning alleyways and underpasses. Thomas Winters had disappeared from the shelter where she'd arranged a temporary bed. The bitter January. Cold had only intensified, bringing with it a dangerous mix of freezing rain and plummeting temperatures. She found him huddled behind the public library, barely conscious, his threadbare jacket soaked through. The rattling cough that shook his frail body sent ice through Elise's veins, pneumonia possibly advanced. His skin burned with fever against her gloved hand. "Thomas? It's Elise. Can you hear me?" she urged, cradling his face. His eyes, once striking blue, were now glassy and unfocused. "Marcy," he mumbled, confusing her with someone from his past. "I told you I'd come home." Elise knew the hospital protocols all too well. Without insurance, Thomas would wait hours, receive minimal treatment, and be discharged back to the streets before he could truly recover. Another statistic, another faceless veteran lost in the system's cracks. Her mind raced through options, each one more impossible than the last, until she remembered Dr. Kelly, the retired army medic who now worked overnight shifts in Riverdale. Memorial's ER. They had bonded over shared military connections and mutual frustration with the system's failures. "Hold on, Thomas, I'm not letting you down," she whispered, helping him into her car. The hospital's service entrance stood illuminated by a single security light. Elise's phone buzzed with Dr. Kelly's text. 10 minutes, no cameras, loading bay 3. Every shadow seemed to watch as she supported Thomas's weight. His breathing labored against her shoulder. If caught, her suspension would become termination. Dr. Kelly could lose his license. The knowledge hung heavy between heartbeats as they waited. A door clicked open. Dr. Kelly's silver hair caught the moonlight as he beckoned them inside. "No paperwork? No records," he warned in hushed tones, leading them through back corridors to an examination room marked equipment storage. "I can give him antibiotics, fluids, and oxygen, but he can't stay past my shift." Thomas's condition was worse than Elise feared. Severe pneumonia, malnutrition, and early-stage frostbite on 3 fingers. Dr. Kelly worked with military efficiency, decades of battlefield medicine, evident in his quick, practiced movements. "I served with men like him," Dr. Kelly muttered as he hung an IV bag. Now they sleep on sidewalks while politicians praise their sacrifice. 3 hours later, with Thomas stabilized and sleeping, Elise faced the inevitable question. Where will you take him? Her apartment lease explicitly prohibited additional occupants. Her suspension meant 2 weeks without pay. Every shelter in the city was operating beyond capacity due to the cold snap. I'll figure it out, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Dawn broke as Elise helped a semi-conscious Thomas into her car, her trunk now filled with antibiotics that fell off the inventory, according to Dr. Kelly. She stopped at the 24-hour grocery, spending nearly half her remaining cash on easily digestible foods, electrolyte drinks, and extra blankets. Her apartment building stood quiet in the early morning light. Mrs. Geller from 3B spotted them, but simply nodded and held the elevator. Door. Another small mercy in a world that seemed determined to look away. As Thomas settled onto her sofa, wrapped in clean blankets, his fever-bright eyes found hers. Why? He asked, the question hanging between them like his clouded breath. Why risk everything for a stranger? Elise placed her father's Marine Corps medal on the coffee table between them. Because you're not a stranger. You're one of his brothers. What? She couldn't possibly know, as exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep in the armchair beside him, was that someone had recognized her car at the hospital. Someone whose decision about what they'd witnessed would set in motion consequences beyond imagination. Chapter 4. The Warning. The knock came at exactly 7:30 a.m., 3 sharp raps that echoed through Elise's apartment with military precision. Thomas, still feverish on her couch, stirred beneath the blankets as she moved cautiously to the door. Through the peephole, Captain Reynolds's stern face came into focus. Her heart sank like a stone. "Just a minute," she called, quickly closing the bedroom door to conceal Thomas's presence. The evidence of her transgression, medication bottles, a makeshift IV stand, and the scent of mentholated ointment remained painfully visible throughout. The living room. Captain Reynolds stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes methodically cataloguing every detail. 23 years with the department had honed his observational skills to near supernatural levels. Nothing escaped his notice, not the 2 coffee mugs on the counter, not the men's boots by the radiator, certainly not the prescription. Bottles with the hospital's unmistakable labeling. "You're on thin ice, Morgan," he said finally, removing his department cap. His voice carried no anger, only a weary resignation that somehow cut deeper. "Thinner than you realize." Elise straightened, her spine, her father's discipline asserting itself. "Sir, with all due respect, Dr. Kelly has been placed on administrative leave," Reynolds interrupted, the words falling between them like hammer blows. "Security footage shows an equipment check in an unused examination room at 2:17 a.m. Footage that mysteriously disappears for 18 minutes afterward." The room seemed to tilt beneath Elise's feet. Dr. Kelly, respected physician, fellow veteran, father of 3, now facing professional ruin because of her actions. "This isn't just about breaking rules anymore, Elise." Reynolds rarely used her first name, a bad sign. "It's about liability, unauthorized medical treatment, misappropriation of hospital resources." He gestured toward the medications on her coffee table. "If that veteran dies under your amateur care, it's not just your job, it's potential criminal charges." "He has a name," Elise said quietly. "Thomas Winters, Korean War, Marine Corps, and he wasn't going to make it through another night on the street." Reynolds' expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I was Army myself, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I understand the impulse, believe me." He paced to her window, looking out at the grey morning. "But we have systems in place." "Systems that failed him," Elise interrupted, heat rising in her voice. Systems that would process him through intake, give him the bare minimum treatment, then discharge him right back to the same sidewalk where I found him. Tell me I'm wrong. The silence confirmed what they both knew. Reynolds sighed heavily. The deputy chief is pushing for your termination. He's building a case as we speak, using both the Firehouse incident and now this. He gestured around. The apartment. Wilson Memorial Hospital filed a formal complaint this morning. How did they even know? Elise asked, though the answer came immediately. Someone had seen her car. Someone had reported her. It doesn't matter how, Reynolds replied. What matters is that I can't protect you anymore. One more incident, one more rule broken, and there's nothing standing between you and unemployment. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. The Homeless Veteran Outreach Program at the VA has beds available. Official channels, Morgan. Get him there today. As the door closed behind him, Elise leaned against the wall, legs suddenly weak. From the bedroom, Thomas's rattling cough reminded her of the human cost behind the captain's warnings. She had 3 days left of antibiotics, nearly empty cupboards, and now a countdown clock ticking toward the end of her career. The choice facing her seemed impossible. Abandon Thomas to an overworked, underfunded system that had already failed him, or continue helping him and lose everything she'd worked for. Elise glanced at her father's photograph, watching from the shelf, his eyes seeming to follow her as she moved through the apartment. What would Staff Sergeant Morgan say now? Follow the rules or follow your conscience? As she prepared a fresh cup of broth for Thomas, Elise didn't yet know that Captain Reynolds had made a phone call immediately after leaving her apartment. A call that would either save or destroy everything she believed in. Chapter 5. Ghost of a hero. Thomas slept fitfully on Elise's couch, medication finally bringing his fever under control. During one of his more lucid moments, he'd asked for his weathered backpack, the only possession he'd managed to keep through years on the streets. Elise had retrieved it from beside her front door, where she'd placed it days earlier, watching as his trembling hands clutched it close like a lifeline to another time. Now, in the quiet stillness of her kitchen, Elise stared at the small metal object that had fallen from the bag's torn lining, a tarnished medal, its ribbon faded but unmistakable, the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration awarded for extreme gallantry and risk of life in combat. Her father had spoken of this medal with reverence. Few lived to receive it. The homeless man on her couch wasn't just any veteran. He was a hero, the kind whose stories filled history books and inspired generations of service members. Her laptop glowed in the pre-dawn darkness as her paramedic training warred with her. Curiosity, Thomas's full name, probable age range, and service branch narrowed her search. Military records were restricted, but public citations and old newspaper archives remained accessible. What she found left her breathless. Lieutenant Thomas, James Winters, United States Marine Corps. Not Korean War as he'd claimed, but Vietnam. 3 tours. Helicopter rescue pilot who flew into active combat zones to extract wounded soldiers when other pilots refused. 27 confirmed rescues under direct enemy fire. A black and white photograph showed a young man in dress uniform, straight-backed, clear-eyed, with the unmistakable confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. Nothing like the broken man whispering to ghosts on her sofa, but after 1971, Thomas Winters simply disappeared. No discharge records, no VA benefits, no paper trail. As if someone had deliberately erased him from official existence. A single, declassified mission report offered the only clue. Operation Switchback terminated due to catastrophic compromise. All assets withdrawn except LT Winters, MIA, presumed KIA. The document was heavily redacted, black lines obscuring whatever had happened during those final days. You shouldn't be looking at that, Elise startled, nearly knocking over her coffee. Thomas stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, his eyes, clear for the first time in days, fixed on the screen. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" Thomas moved with painful slowness to sit across from her. In the blue glow of the computer screen, the hollow planes of his face cast dramatic shadows that somehow restored a glimpse of the young officer from the photograph. "The man in those records died in Laos in 1971, he said, his voice steadier than she'd ever heard it. What came back was something else. He reached for the Navy Cross with reverent hands. "This belonged to my co-pilot, Gavin Dawson, 23 years old, Kansas farm boy." His fingers traced the medal's contours. "They gave it to me to bring home to his mother when I got back, but I never did." "Why not?" Elise asked, sensing she was witnessing the unveiling. "Of a ghost." Thomas's eyes clouded with memories. "Some missions aren't in any books, Elise. Some wars never officially happened." His gaze drifted to the middle distance. "We flew into places we weren't supposed to be, rescued people who officially weren't there, saw things that were never meant to be seen." Elise's paramedic training recognized the telltale signs of severe PTSD in his 1,000-yard stare. "And when you came home, I wasn't deemed stable enough for public knowledge." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Easier to list me as killed in action than explain what the war had done to my mind. Honorable discharge papers were drafted, but never filed. My service record was sealed, then gradually erased." He looked directly at her, suddenly present again. "Do you know what it's like to be a ghost while you're still breathing? To be both a hero and a liability to the very country you nearly died for?" Elise closed her laptop, the pieces finally fitting together. Why Thomas had no benefits, no pension, no support system. The government had found it more convenient to let him fade away than acknowledge what had happened to him. "I know what it's like to do the right thing and be punished for it," she said softly. "But I never imagined anything like this." Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, its government plates partially obscured by morning frost, its occupants watching Elise's apartment with mechanical patience. The phone's harsh ring shattered the pre-dawn silence. Elise jolted awake in her armchair, momentarily disoriented, until her eyes found Thomas sleeping peacefully on her couch. The digital clock on her microwave blinked 5:17 a.m. "Morgan," she answered, voice thick with sleep. "Report to Station 42, 600 hours. Captain Reynolds's clipped tone held an unfamiliar edge. "Dress uniform." "Sir, I'm still suspended for another—" "This isn't about your suspension." A pause hung between them, heavy with unspoken significance. "Be presentable, Morgan, and discreet." The line went dead before she could ask any questions. Thomas stirred as she moved about the apartment. "Everything all right?" he asked, his breathing less labored than it had been in days. "Just work," she lied, laying out medication and food where he could reach it. "I won't be long." The January morning greeted her with bitter cold and a sky still dotted with fading stars. Frost patterns decorated her windshield like silent warnings, intricate, beautiful, and ultimately fleeting. As she scraped the ice away, Elise couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the shadows between buildings. The firehouse stood unnaturally quiet when she arrived at 5:55 a.m. No crews changing shifts, no equipment being checked, no familiar banter echoing through the bay. Only Captain Reynolds's SUV occupied the normally bustling parking area. Inside, Reynolds paced the length of the conference room, his usual composed demeanor fractured by an anxious energy she'd never witnessed in him before. "What's happening, Captain?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "I received a call yesterday," he began, checking his watch. "Pentagon, Military Intelligence Division." The words hung in the air like smoke. "They asked for you by name, Morgan. Not me, not the chief, you. Elise felt her throat constrict. The Pentagon, why would they? Your homeless veteran isn't as forgotten as you thought. Reynolds lowered his voice. Someone very high up is taking a personal interest in Thomas Winters, and by extension, in you. Before Elise could process this information, the sound of vehicles approaching outside drew their attention. Through the window, she watched 3 black SUVs with government plates form a precise semicircle in the parking lot. Men in dark suits emerged, scanning the surroundings with practiced efficiency. Whatever happens next, Reynolds said quietly, remember you did the right thing. I've got your back. The conference room door opened without a knock. A woman in her 50s entered. Silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a charcoal pantsuit that practically screamed federal authority. Behind her stood 2 military officers in full-dress uniform, their faces impassive. "Paramedic Elise Morgan?" the woman asked, though it clearly wasn't a question. Elise straightened. Instinctively, "Yes, ma'am. Colonel Victoria Hayes, Department of Defense." She placed a leather portfolio on the table. "These are Major Daniels and Captain Rodriguez from Veterans Affairs Special Operations Division." Elise glanced at Reynolds, who looked equally bewildered. Neither had heard of such a division. "I understand you've been providing unauthorized shelter and medical care to Lieutenant Thomas James Winters," Colonel Hayes continued, her tone impossible to read. "A man who, according to official records, died in Southeast Asia over 50 years ago." The room seemed to tilt beneath Elise's feet. "He needed help. Colonel Hayes raised a hand, silencing her. "Ms. Morgan, are you aware that harboring an individual with Lieutenant Winters' security clearance and operational history could be considered a matter of national security?" The words struck like physical blows. What had she stumbled into? Who was Thomas Winters beyond the fragmented story he'd shared? Lieutenant Winters participated in operations so classified that most of the men who authorized them are long dead, Colonel Hayes continued. Yet here he is, alive and speaking with a civilian paramedic about matters sealed for half a century. One of the military officers placed a satellite phone on the table. It began to ring, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "This call is for you," Colonel Hayes said, sliding the phone toward Elise. "The Secretary of Defense would like a word." Reynolds's sharp intake of breath matched Elise's own shock. The Secretary of Defense? For a suspended paramedic who had helped a homeless veteran? As she reached for the phone with trembling fingers, Elise realized her simple act of compassion had somehow entangled her in something far beyond her understanding, something that reached into the highest echelons of military power. What secrets did Thomas Winters carry that could still matter after all these years? The satellite phone felt unnaturally heavy in Elise's hand. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she raised it slowly to her face. "This is Paramedic Morgan," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Ms. Morgan." The male voice on the other end carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to immediate respect. "My name is Colonel James Blackwood, Senior Aide to General Robert Henderson, United States Marine Corps, retired." Not the Secretary of Defense, but close enough to send cold ripples down Elise's spine. Colonel Hayes and the military officers watched her with unreadable expressions. "General Henderson has been looking for Lieutenant Winters for 47 years, Blackwood continued, "since the day he was listed KIA in a mission that officially never happened." Elise's mind raced to process this information. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would a retired general—" "Because Lieutenant Winters saved his life, along with 11 other men in a classified extraction under heavy fire in Laos," Blackwood interrupted. "The operation was deemed too politically sensitive to acknowledge. When Winters didn't return from his final mission, it was easier for certain parties to let him vanish from the records entirely. The conference room seemed to shrink around Elise as the magnitude of what she was hearing settled over her. Lieutenant Winters led a unit of helicopter pilots assigned to extract intelligence assets and compromised operatives from territories where American forces weren't officially present. Blackwood explained. They flew unmarked helicopters. If captured, they had no identification, no dog tags, nothing to connect them to U.S. military operations. Colonel Hayes slid a weathered photograph across the table. 6 men stood beside a helicopter with no markings, their faces young and determined. Thomas stood in the center, barely recognizable as the frail man on Elise's couch. "Ghost Squadron," Hayes said quietly. The record of their existence was deliberately erased after the war. Their missions remain classified to this day. Blackwood's voice continued through the phone. General Henderson was a young lieutenant when Winters pulled him and his reconnaissance team out of a hot zone after they were compromised. 2 of Winters' crew died during the extraction. Henderson never forgot. When he retired 5 years ago, the general began a personal mission to track down the men who saved him, to ensure they received the recognition and benefits they deserved, Blackwood said. 5 were confirmed deceased, but Winters remained a ghost. Rumors of sightings, whispers of a decorated pilot living on the streets, but nothing concrete until your incident report mentioned a homeless veteran with a Navy Cross medal. Elise remembered writing that detail, almost as an afterthought in her documentation of the Firehouse incident, a small note about Thomas having a medal that suggested military service. That report was flagged by the VA's system and eventually reached us, Blackwood confirmed as if reading her thoughts. Then your disciplinary hearing mentioned his name. We've been searching this city for days. He needs medical attention, Elise said. Proper care. That's why we're here, Colonel Hayes interjected, to bring Lieutenant Winters home, to give him everything he was denied all these years. General Henderson has arranged full VA benefits, backdated pension, medical care at our best facilities, and formal recognition of his service, Blackwood added. He's also prepared to ensure your record is cleared, Ms. Morgan. The weight of revelation pressed against Elise's chest. The broken man she'd found huddled against the firehouse wall wasn't just any veteran. He was a genuine hero whose extraordinary service had been deliberately hidden from history. There's something else you should know, Blackwood said, his voice softening slightly. Those missions Lieutenant Winters flew. They saved over 200 American lives, soldiers, intelligence officers, and diplomats who would have been captured or killed. Men who came home to their families because of him. Men who never knew his name or got to thank him. Elise thought of her father's words. True heroes often go unrecognized. Your compassion didn't just help a homeless veteran, Ms. Morgan, Blackwood concluded. It brought a ghost back from the dead. It restored a hero to his rightful place in history. Outside the conference room windows, the first golden rays of sunrise broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the firehouse floor. In that moment of clarity, Elise understood that her simple act of kindness on a cold winter night had somehow set right a decades-old injustice. She had followed her heart instead of protocol, and in doing so had changed the course of a forgotten hero's life. The firehouse transformed overnight. What had been a disciplinary nightmare became a carefully orchestrated reunion. Chief Barton arrived in his dress uniform, his earlier anger replaced by an almost deferential demeanor. City officials, who had previously backed Elise's suspension, now hovered awkwardly in the background, their political instincts recognizing which way the wind had shifted. Thomas Winters sat in a wheelchair near the center of the room, his frail frame draped in a new Marine Corps jacket that hung loose on his shoulders. The antibiotics had done their work. His eyes were clear, his breathing steady. He looked both uncomfortable with the attention and strangely dignified, as if some essential part of the lieutenant he once was had reawakened. Elise stood beside him, still processing the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. Colonel Hayes had arranged for Thomas to receive immediate medical care at the VA hospital, but he had insisted on being present for today's meeting. "He's coming himself?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "After all these years?" "Yes, Lieutenant," Colonel Hayes replied with unusual gentleness. "He never stopped looking." The convoy arrived with military precision. 3 black SUVs and a town car with small American flags mounted on the hood. The Firehouse fell silent as the vehicles came to a stop. Colonel Blackwood emerged first, scanning the surroundings before opening the rear door of the town car. The man who stepped out moved with the measured confidence that came from decades of command. Though in his 70s, General Robert Henderson's posture remained ramrod straight, his white hair cropped close in a military cut that he had likely worn since his academy days. His eyes, sharp beneath heavy brows, found Thomas. Immediately, time seemed to suspend as the general crossed the distance between them. No one spoke. No one moved. This moment belonged to these two men, connected by acts of courage half a century ago. The general stopped before Thomas's wheelchair and did something that sent a ripple of surprise through the room. He came to attention and delivered a perfect formal salute. "Lieutenant Winters," he said, his voice carrying despite its softness. "I've waited 50 years to thank you properly." Thomas, trembling with emotion, returned the salute as best he could from his seated position. "The debt I owe you can never be repaid," General Henderson continued. 11 men came home to their families because you flew into hell to get us out. I have lived a full life, raised children, seen grandchildren born, served our country for 40 years, all because you refused to leave us behind. The general knelt beside the wheelchair, military protocol giving way to human connection. "I promised myself that if I ever found you, I would make it right." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "This isn't an official military decoration. Those are coming, all the medals you earned but never received, but this..." He opened the box to reveal a large gold coin with the Marine Corps emblem on one side and an inscription on the other. "This is from the men you saved. We call it the Ghost Squadron Coin of Valor. Only 6 exist in the world." The emotion that crossed Thomas's face was almost too intimate to witness. Recognition, pride, and a deep healing that transcended words. Then, unexpectedly, General Henderson turned to Elise. "And you, Ms. Morgan?" His weathered face broke into a warm smile. "You did what an entire government apparatus failed to do. You saw the man, not the circumstances. You honored his humanity when everyone else had forgotten it." From another pocket, he produced a second, smaller box. "This is not standard protocol, but nothing about this situation has been standard." Inside lay another coin, similar to Thomas's, but with a different inscription. "For recognition beyond rank, one life saved, one life honored." "This is not about military service or civic duty," the general said, placing it in her palm. "This is about recognizing that sometimes the greatest acts of valor happen without orders, without uniforms, without recognition. You acted purely from compassion, and in doing so, you've restored a piece of history and a man's dignity." Elise's vision blurred with unexpected tears as she closed her fingers around the coin. She thought of her father and how proud he would have been of this moment, not because of the recognition, but because she had followed the principles he had instilled in her. As cameras flashed and officials stepped forward to share in the moment, Elise and Thomas exchanged a glance of perfect understanding. In a world of protocols and procedures, they had found something more valuable. A human connection that transcended rules and restored faith in compassion's power. Spring arrived in Riverdale with gentle persistence, green life pushing through, soil still thawing from winter's grip. At the VA Medical Center, the hallways gleamed with morning light as Elise made her way to room 317. 3 months had transformed Thomas Winters from the homeless veteran she'd found, huddled against the firehouse, to a man slowly reclaiming his dignity. "The physical therapist says I walked 30 feet yesterday," Thomas announced as she entered, pride evident in his voice. The room around him had become a testament to his restored identity. Photographs of Ghost Squadron lined one wall. Medals he'd earned but never received, displayed in a polished case. And cards from the families of men he'd saved arriving weekly as word of his reappearance spread through military networks. "Soon you'll be running marathons," Elise teased, setting a fresh bouquet beside his bed. Their friendship had deepened. Through his recovery, she the witness to his resurrection, he the catalyst for her unexpected new path. The knock at the door was precisely on time. Colonel Hayes entered, accompanied by General Henderson and a woman in a tailored suit whose bearing suggested both military background and political acumen. "Ms. Morgan," the general greeted her warmly, "I'd like you to meet Senator Catherine Jameson. She chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee and has been instrumental in our new initiative." The senator extended her hand. "Ms. Morgan, your actions with Lieutenant Winters have sparked something remarkable. We've been watching the ripple effects with great interest." Elise shook the offered hand, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention her simple act of compassion had generated. News of Thomas's story had spread first through military channels, then to local media, and finally to national outlets. What began as a disciplinary incident had transformed into a catalyst for examining how emergency services responded to veterans in crisis. "The senator has secured funding for a pilot program," Colonel Hayes explained, placing a leather portfolio on Thomas's bedside table. "We're calling it VALOR, Veterans Acute Liaison for Outreach and Response," General Henderson continued. "Emergency responders specifically trained in veteran mental health and crisis care. People who can recognize the signs of combat-related trauma, who understand military culture, who can connect veterans immediately to the right resources." His eyes moved between Elise and Thomas. "People who see the person behind the circumstances." "We'd like you to lead the training development," the senator said directly to Elise. "Your background in emergency medicine combined with your, let's call it, willingness to put humanity before bureaucracy makes you uniquely qualified." Elise's breath caught. "But I broke the rules. I'm still technically on probation." "Sometimes the rules need to be reconsidered," Senator Jameson replied. "Your chief has already agreed to release you for this assignment. If you're interested, full salary plus a federal stipend." Thomas reached for Elise's hand, his weathered fingers surprisingly strong. "Think of how many others are out there, Elise. Men and women like me who fell through the cracks, who need someone to see them." The faces flashed through her mind, the homeless veterans she'd encountered throughout her career, the ones she'd helped in small ways, and the many more she couldn't. How many had stories like Thomas? How many had served in ways that left them broken but unrecognized? "I'm not interested in creating more bureaucracy," Elise said carefully. "Neither are we," the general assured her. "We want to create connection, training first responders to recognize when they're facing a veteran in crisis, giving them the tools and authority to act compassionately without fear of repercussion." That evening, alone in her apartment, Elise stood before the small shelf that held her father's photograph. The Marine Corps medal that had been his pride now sat beside the coin General Henderson had given her. 2 generations, 2 forms of service, connected by the same underlying principle, that duty without humanity was empty. She ran her fingers across her father's image. "What do you think, Dad? A desk job instead of an ambulance." But she already knew what Staff Sergeant Morgan would say. True service wasn't about where you worked or what your title was. It was about the lives you touched along the way. Elise pinned the special coin next to her father's medal, the two pieces of metal catching. The last light of day. One life saved, one life honored, and now perhaps many more to come. In breaking protocol to help a single forgotten hero, she had unwittingly found her true calling, not just saving lives in moments of crisis, but recognizing and honoring the warriors who had given so much and asked for so little in return. As she reached for her phone to accept the position, Elise knew with perfect clarity that this wasn't about advancement or recognition. This was about continuing what had begun. On that cold night against the firehouse wall, seeing the heroes who had become invisible and bringing them back into the light.